Hello, welcome to Wickham Cottage. My name is Sarah. This is my very first video. You will probably be able to tell. Hopefully I'll get better at this, but I thought it would be really nice for the new year if I could teach some of the things that I know how to do to all of you. So mainly what I do is counted cross stitch and quilting, but I think I'm best known for my knitting. So I thought that we could start with a block afghan, where you make little blocks, you learn new stitches, and then you can sew them all together. Now, that's really good for various charitable organizations such as Warm Up America in the United States, where I live. You can practice stitches and you can just do as much as you can do, and then you can send them off. Somebody else will sew them together and they will donate them to people in need. It's a very, very good organization, and I've helped them out in the past. So what I did yesterday was I went off to Michael's. Most people have a Michael's or a Joann or a Hobby Lobby, a big box craft store where you can go and buy yarn. And what I did was I bought this impeccable, it's loops and threads. Here comes a cat. You may see a little bit of a cat. This loops and threads, it wasn't my first choice. I like to knit with wool. Wool blocks well. When you spend a lot of time making cables or lace for an heirloom sweater, you want it to hold its shape. You want it to do the things that you want it to do. Acrylic has a mind of its own. It just, you knit it, and that's pretty much the end. You can't shape it very well. You can a little bit, not a whole lot, and it's not easy. But the advantage is it's 100% acrylic. Or if you get something like Wool Ease by Lion Brand, it's usually 80-20. So it's got a little bit of wool, but mostly acrylic. The joy in that is that you can wash it. So if you're giving a gift, a knit gift to someone, and you don't know if they're going to be able to launder it, if they want to launder it, if they'll have the wherewithal to even think about, how do I wash this? You want to give them something that you can just toss in the laundry and it'll come out fine. That's acrylic, and that's why people use it. It's readily available. It takes dye well, so you've got nice colors to deal with. And that's why I ended up choosing this impeccable. It's 285 yards in a ball. Some people call this a skein. Some people call it a ball. It comes out the center. Some people like to unravel it from the outside. I prefer the center. It keeps its shape nicely. The yarn comes out clean and untouched. It just makes for a better knitting experience, in my opinion. Now, what I need to preface is this is all my opinion. This is from years and years and years and years of knitting. I would like to wear my own makes on this channel. I like to design sweaters and knit sweaters. This is one that I did not design, but I wanted to start with it because it's really the very first Aran sweater that I ever knit. I was about 19, 20-ish. I think I started it when I was a little bit younger than that. But the yarn came from Scotland. It came in one huge ball. It was the hugest ball of yarn that I've ever seen. And it came with instructions, and I followed the instructions, and they made sense. And that was good. I got a sweater. It's a raglan, which means that it kind of goes on a diagonal and cuts across here, as opposed to a traditional sleeve that ends about here, or a drop sleeve that ends there. I'm not really crazy about raglans. I don't have that many. I don't like to design them. But I like this sweater. This has been a very good sweater. I've had it for a lot of years. I've had it for a lot of years. But anyway, back to our Afghan. So if you'd like to participate with me, all you need to do is get yarn that you like, basically yarn that you like. Like I said, this is acrylic, and if you look on the ball band, you see this number 4. So that's you know, a newer kind of invention. They started having weights attached to yarn, so you can tell if it's a very, very fine lace weight yarn, which is no wider than a thread, or if it's a really thick, chunky yarn. This is a number 4. It's a medium. So it's about an Aran weight or a worsted weight. It's a good beginner weight. And normally the size needles that you would use would be a size 8. Now, needles are a tricky thing. Needles come in straight needles like this, or they come in circular needles, which are two needles attached with a long cord. And I think that people tend to tout circular needles. Get a circular needle, you'll never need anything else. It's easy, you know, to use. I don't like circular needles. I like them when I'm using them for what I like to use them for, which are collars, things like this. If you're knitting this whole thing just circularly, round and around and around and around, you want a circular needle. Or if you're making a Norwegian sweater, around and around and around, it's very, very nice. But for these blocks, I like to use straight needles. They're easier to deal with. They give you a nicer result. They come in wood. I'm not a really big fan of wooden needles. They also come in nickel and sort of a plasticky. You know, you get that nice knitting needle sound. So basically, that's what I use. I use the nickel plated. These are called Addy turbos that I use, and they're meant to be very slick and let you knit very, very fast. But I've never really noticed that they knit any faster. Now, one reason why people might prefer wood needles is because they're kind of stickier, and they make it so that you don't lose your stitches as easily as if you're on a slippery metal needle. But I think you'll be fine. You will be perfectly fine with whatever kind of needle you prefer. If you're happy using your tools, your yarn, your needles, you're going to be good and you're going to enjoy yourself. So basically, I'm designing my Afghan for you guys so that if you would like to donate to the charity that I spoke of earlier, Knit Warm Up America, what they like are blocks that measure 7 inches by 9 inches. They've decided that that's a good size. If everybody makes 7 by 9, they'll all fit together nicely. They make nice size Afghans, so that's what they want. Now, knitting, I'm going to show you this swatch, this block that I've done. This is called Garter Stitch, and that's what we're going to start with. Yarn is stretchy, you know, which is a good thing. And so when you're knitting something that needs to be 7 inches wide, well, is it 7 inches wide here, or is it 7 inches? You know, sometimes it's hard to tell. But basically, if it's approximately 7 by 9, you'll be fine. They're not going to get out their rulers and measure. They just want a piece that is this size. Not completely square, more rectangular. So 7 by 9 is what they like. And you can have it this way or this way. That's another thing that makes it kind of cool. You can put your blocks together at the end however you would like to do it. I have chosen 3 colors. I think I forgot to mention. This one is Laurel. It's a very, very nice green. I have also chosen this blue called Smoke. It's a very pale blue. Oh, hold on just a sec. So sorry, I got interrupted by the timer. I'm as usual multitasking. Try not to multitask. Anyway, my third color is this. It's called Petunia, and it's a very light violet. So I thought that the 3 colors together are very soft for spring. They're good for a baby. They're just, they just were really nice colors. They spoke to me, and that's important. So that's what I ended up buying. And sorry, using the floor as a table. But what I thought I would do is start out with very basic stitches, because this is acrylic and it's not going to hold its shape as well as wool. Perhaps we will do a wool afghan too, with a lot of cables and laces and, really, really fun stitches. But for this is for beginners or people getting back into knitting. This is going to be fun. It's going to be easy. If you are an experienced knitter, these are great to do in front of the TV. If you just want to calm yourself at the end of a day, get out a little bit of knitting and just knit, 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 knit. It's very soothing. They called it a few years ago, they called knitting the new yoga. So anyway, so what we're going to do, this is one stitch that everybody tends to recognize. This is what most sweaters are made of. It's called stockinette stitch. And basically in knitting, there are 2 stitches. There is a knit stitch and a purl stitch. Knit stitch, you're going from the front of the work to the back of the work, wrapping your yarn around, pulling it through. Purl stitch is the opposite. You're going from the back of the work to the front of the work. Now, if you just knit every single row, just knit, 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 you end up with garter stitch. And that's what this looks like. See these little ridges? Those are called garter ridges, and they're very nice. This is knit every row. If you purled every row, it would still look like this. Basically what you're doing is repeating the same stitch on every row, either knit or purl. Knit is easier, most people prefer it, so that's why garter stitch is usually knit every row. So we're going to start with garter stitch. Then when we learn how to purl, we're going to knit this side, purl this side. See those are called purl bumps. So that's how you can tell that that's the back of the stockinette. That's the front. Or what you're going to learn later on is this is called stockinette stitch. This is called reverse stockinette stitch. Basically, there is no right side, wrong side. It's all whatever you want to make it. And then another one that I'm working on is combining the 2. This is a rib stitch. Everybody knows rib. Rib is at the bottom of your sweaters generally. This is a 1x1 rib, meaning 1 knit, 1 purl, 1 knit. So when they say the old thing, knit 1, purl 2, that's a rib. If you do that on every row so that all of the knits line up and all the purls line up, you've got a rib. This is called an interrupted rib, or, some people call it other things, but basically here's a rib, and in between there's our garter. So to make this, it's pretty neat. On the right side row, or what some people call the public side, what you would like people to see, you just knit. You just knit across, which is what we will have already learned when we do this. On the other side, you can see this deviates a little bit from a traditional rib. Rib is usually reversible, so the front and the back look the same. This is different because on the reverse side, we are going to do the rib. Purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, all the way across. And then when we turn it, instead of doing that again and making sure everything lines up, you just knit. So this one's a fun one too, but we're not there yet. First, we have to learn how to knit. The very first thing that we're going to do is learn how to cast on our stitches. Now in America, when we put the stitches on the needle, it's called cast on. When we take all of the stitches off the needle at the end of our project, it's called bind off. Now in other countries, sometimes you hear cast on, cast off. You know, we use cast on and bind off. And there are a lot of ways to do a cast on. What I'm going to show you are 3 cast ons that I know of, that I use. One is the long tail cast on, which is traditionally what everyone learns. I don't really like it, and I'll tell you why. When I work the long tail cast on, what I'm doing is putting some twist into one of my loops, one of my hanging, one of my tails. Every time I do that, it untwists the yarn. And so you start out with a nice yarn, and over time it tends to lose its twist, and I don't like that. Now when I was young, I was taught a long tail cast on. I have never seen it being taught anywhere. It's basically the same thing, but you go about it differently. I'm going to show you that one. But the thing with the long tail cast on is you have 2 long tails, 2 pieces of yarn, and you're kind of working them together to form your initial stitches. If you are casting on 300, 400, 500 stitches, you need to pull out a tail that long. And if you get to stitch number 498 and you've run out of yarn and you have to rip that whole thing out, oh my gosh, it's a bummer. It really, really is. So for our project, we're just casting on, I think this is 33 stitches. We're good. If you use the long tail cast on and you fall short of stitches, it's not a big deal to rip it out and work it again. So it's perfectly fine. There are ways where long tail is quick and easy if you're just doing a swatch, which is our way of saying, knitter's way of saying, cast on some stitches, work some rows, figure out if you're getting gauge. Gauge is the measurement, how many stitches you'll need to equal the length involved. It's a great one to know. You just do it. But another one that I like is called the cable cast on. And that one, you can have a very short tail. Now, never ever try to have a tail that's very, very short, because the yarn that's left at the end of a needle is very useful. If you want to sew something up, if you want to weave it in, it's very useful to have a little bit of length to work with. So don't try to get every piece of the yarn, so that it's doing something. It's okay to start out with a little bit of a length, maybe a foot in length. And basically what you do is you're working the stitches, you're putting them on, making another one, putting it on, making another one. So you can count the stitches as you go along. And if you get to 400, 500 stitches, you're good. And that's why I like the cable cast on. Plus it's a pretty cast on and it's fun to work. But that's basically why I think a lot of people use it, because it's not a long tail. You don't have to guess how many stitches you need at the very beginning, especially if you're a beginner and you have no concept of how much yarn am I going to run through. A lot of people like to go by 1 inch per stitch, but then again, it depends on what yarn you're using. Is it a chunky yarn? Is it a very fine yarn? Do you knit tightly? Do you knit loosely? So you have to kind of knit for a while to make a good guess at how much you're going to need. But anyway, let's get started. Let's learn some of these cast-ons. Let me reposition the camera. I'm new at this. I have to figure it all out. But let me reposition things, and I will teach you my 3 most used cast-ons to begin work for knitting our afghan. Okay, so to start our long tail cast on, you want to take the yarn, like I said, I like to pull it from the middle of the yarn ball. And basically what you want to do is guesstimate how much yarn you're going to need. For this, I don't need a whole lot because I'm just teaching. To make a slip knot, you wrap the yarn, kind of cross it at the base, and then pull through. Okay? And if you've done it correctly, it just slips right out. So basically wrap it around, so that it's crossed, and then pull that through. Okay? So what we're going to do is we are going to put our slip knot on the needle. Basically, that's our first stitch. Now, what you want to do is position your hands like this. So you've got one strand that's underneath your index finger, one strand that's underneath your thumb. You're going to go through the loop that's on your thumb, grab the piece that's on your index finger, pull it through and tighten it up using your thumb. So basically, again, under this first loop by your thumb, grab the part that's on your index finger, pull it through, and tighten it up. I think that's a lot of work. Don't you think that's a lot of work? And it's a little bit confusing. So what I like to do, I keep my slip knot on. I am putting my needle between my legs, basically, so it's standing up. You take each length, one in each hand, and again, you're doing this twisty thing with your index finger, and you're putting it on the needle thusly. Take this piece, wrap it around, bring this up and over, pull it tight. Not too tight. I'm not, when I say tight, I don't mean, all your strength. I just mean so that it's, you've got room to move them, but it's not sloppy loose like that. You just want to firm it up a little bit. So what you're doing is sort of crossing the yarns a little bit, putting it through, and then wrapping around and securing it. I'm going to keep doing these so you can just watch. In, around, over, and pull. Loop, round, over, and pull. Okay? So I'm going to do a few more of those just so you've really got it. So you're going to start with the slip knot. This becomes second nature after a while, and I'm sure you can Google this and find all sorts of videos on making a slip knot. And even if you didn't make a slip knot, even if you just wrapped it around and tied, that would be fine too. You just want to get a loop on the needle that's secured in some fashion. We just always do the slip knot. Take it up, twist just a little bit so that you can, if your yarn is out like this, it's hard to make it into a stitch. So you want to twist it a little bit. Wrap it around, pop it over the top, and pull. So I'm going to do some more of these so that it becomes second nature. Follow along. I know on a lot of videos, they just do things too quickly, and it's hard to see what they're doing and match your hands to theirs. But it's a very simple long tail cast on. Like I said, my mother taught me this when I was very, very young, like 7, 8 years old, and I've never seen it anywhere. I've never seen it taught. I've never seen it on a video, but it comes out very nicely. So there's that one. And to show you again, the traditional long tail cast on, maybe it'll make a little more sense to you now. Basically, you're doing the same thing. You're giving the yarn a little bit of twist, and instead of taking the other loop and wrapping it around, what you're going to do is kind of scoop it under. So it's working the same kind of way, it's just doing it differently. You're making a little crossed loop there, you're scooping some yarn to form a stitch, and you're pulling it taut. So scoop, grab that yarn, tighten it up. So I'm using my thumb and my forefingers. I don't know if you can see, what I'm doing is using them and pulling in opposite directions. So going from there and pulling the yarn apart a little bit. Here's another one. Okay, those are two long tail methods. Now what I want to show you is, and when you've just made a little knot like this, you're going to have to take it out. It's not a slip knot, remember. So we don't like knots in our knitting. If you've made a sock and you've got a knot that's right underneath your foot, you're going to feel that. Equally, if you've got a baby sweater and you've got a knot right where the baby is leaning against something on its back, they're not going to like a knot. So knots are not good. I won't say that I have never used a knot in knitting, because sometimes you will. But okay, so I'm going to start with a slip knot. Now this time I don't need a long tail. That's ample for our purposes. And instead of having two lengths, we're only going to have one length, but we're going to use two needles. So I do a cable cast on by putting the needle through this, through the stitch that I've just made. This is our first stitch. You wrap it around the needle that's in the back, the right hand needle, and you pull it through. Now, what I'm going to do is give a little slack there so that I can then use my left needle, go underneath the stitch, and pop it on your needle. And then what you would like to do is pull this taut, but don't. Now, I do the cable cast on, which goes between the two stitches that are just formed. Another is a knitted cast on, which just goes through this stitch again, around, pull it through, and form a stitch. And you can just leave your needle there, just pop it to the back. Again, I'm using my index finger to kind of tighten up the yarn once it's through. And pop it back on. That's the knitted cast on. I like to go between the stitches though. I don't know, I think it's firmer. I think you get a nicer edge. So I'm just basically just between these stitches. That's all I'm doing. Wrap the yarn from, let's see, I guess in a way it's counterclockwise. It's going from the right to the left, looping it around the needle, and then gently pull it through. Pull it up, twist it a little bit so that you can pop your stitch on, and before you've drawn it taut, stick it between those two stitches, tighten it up a little bit with your index finger, and go again. And do you see how I'm kind of using a lot of fingers? It's not just using the knitting needles. I'm pulling this with my right index finger, popping the yarn around, using my left index finger to kind of help push the needle through a little bit, because one easy way to lose a stitch is to not use your fingers, just kind of pulling it and you lose it. So enlisting aid from other fingers, keeping your stitches close to the ends of the needle. Now again, I'm not doing this way down here on my knitting needles. I'm working pretty close to the tips. Now it's okay, the tips are tapered. It's okay to work in the tip, but then when you get your stitch on there, make sure that you're down in this part of the knitting needle, which is where the size of the knitting needle comes into play. Because if you've got all your stitches up here where it's tapered, the stitches aren't going to be the right size. Okay, so that's basically it. That is a cast on. Right now, we just want to get started. That's our mission, is just to get the stitches on the needle so that you can learn how to knit. So I'm going to tuck my needle in my legs. My nice fat thighs will keep it steady. And I'm going to do my knot there, not a knot, just a loop. And again, I'm going to get the stitches on the needle, up and around, pull it tight. It's very relaxing, very, very relaxing. What you want these to be equal. You don't want to have it way up in the top and you wrap it around and you pull it so that there's that big loop. We don't want that. We want all of them to be done pretty much the same way. And if you notice, when I felt like I twisted it a little bit. Maybe I did on that one stitch, I don't know. But I find this a very relaxing cast on method. And then when you get to the end, you've got the number of stitches that you would like. And in this, I'm going to tell you how many stitches you need to cast on, but we're just working this many for now. You can leave it like this, or you can loop it around and have just a little securing piece there. It really doesn't make that much difference. Now, when we start to knit, you've got two lengths here. One was from your cast on, so tuck that away a little bit. We don't want that bothering us. Pick up your knitting needle, and you've seen this a little bit from that cable cast on. Basically, you're going through the stitch. You're going from the front to the back through this top loop, wrapping the yarn around, pulling it through, and off. The cable cast on, remember, we twisted it and put it back on for a stitch. We're just knitting now. So we're just going to wrap it around, pull it through, wrap it around, pull it through. See how easy that is? There's nothing to it. Nothing to it. Now there's different methods with this. Some people use their index finger. Some people even hold it in their other hand. This is one method. And we'll experiment with all this stuff. You can find what's best for you. But basically what I like to do, what keeps my tension good, is holding it not too far away from the needle, actually. I whack my thumb all the time. But I twist it around there, pull it through. See how close to the tips I'm actually working? There you are. The last stitch is a little more difficult because that was our slip knot or a regular knot. And that one's usually a little bit tighter. So just that end stitch is never gonna, it's never gonna look great, but we deal, right? Now we're at the end. We just turn it over so that now it's in our left hand again. Here's our loop. Here's our tail. Our tail is now at this end of the work, so just hold it in your pinky. Hold it out of the way. We're going to do the exact same thing. These are our purl bumps. We're just going to go in, loop it around, pull it through. We're knitting. This is a knit stitch, and it couldn't be easier. It makes fabric. We're making fabric. So again, in from the front. Now when I say in from the front, as opposed to going in from the back, see what I'm doing there? Sort of stabbing ourselves with the needle. We don't want that. We want to go from the front through, like we're jabbing somebody else. And like I said before, when you knit every row, you end up with what is called garter stitch. So you can see here little tiny V's. These are our knit stitch. It's a little V. On the right side it's a V. On the wrong side it's a purl bump. Okay, and when you've got two rows that are both knit, that's what it looks like. Let me knit just a little bit more so that you can see what a garter ridge looks like. Garter ridge is good in all sorts of applications. Some people use it as ribbing. Some people use it as a decorative element. Some people like to do garter ridges along sides of afghans. So if you cast on a lot of stitches, say 150, 200 stitches, and that's a case where you really do have to use a circular needle because you need the length of the cord to keep all the stitches. But if you do that and you put a few garter stitches at the bottom and the sides and then at the top, it secures the afghan. It's a knitted in edging. And that way you don't have to go back along later with a crochet hook or turn the whole thing under or, try to do some kind of a nice finish. It's already there for you. All you have to do is 3 to 6 knit stitches at the beginning and end of each row. It's brilliant. So garter stitch has gained in popularity over the last few years. There are patterns for just a simple garter stitch sweater. All you do is knit throughout. It's simple and it's lovely and it's durable and it's warm. But now we've done a little bit and you can start to see the ridges. Now you're not seeing the knitted V's and the purl bumps as much. What you're seeing is this nice garter ridge. See, the V's are there. They are there. So you've got your knitted V's and your purl bumps, but they form ridges now. And when you have lots and lots and lots of them, it looks like that. Isn't that lovely? And it's so easy. All you did was cast on to get the stitches on the needle, and you poked your needle from front to back, wrapped the yarn around, and pulled it through. And you get this lovely piece of work. Now I also want to show something else. This is called a stitch holder. And basically what I did was I knit my swatch. This measures 7 by 9. Get out our nice, can't really do this holding it up like this, but you can see it's basically 7 inches across. and it is 9 inches in length, approximately. Okay, so it's time that this is off the needle. Okay, it is off the needle because I've put it on a stitch marker. But say you did a bunch of these and you wanted to bind them off all at once. You could do that with enough stitch holders, excuse me. The other thing you can do if you're waiting and you don't feel like binding off yet, you can always put them on a spare needle. You just don't want to change the size of the stitches considerably. So if you're working on a size 8 needle, put them on another size 8 needle, or put them on a size 7 needle or a size 6 needle. Just don't put them on a size 10 because you're going to stretch out your stitches and that's going to be quite noticeable. But basically all I'm doing is I was holding those stitches. Now, sometimes you want to hold stitches because you are separating a sweater and you're holding stitches for the sleeve, or you've worked one front and of a sweater and you want to work the other front and then decrease them all at the same time. So there's times when you want to hold your stitches, or say you're going on a world cruise and you can't deal with your knitting till you get back. Put your stitches on a holder. You can see this is much thinner, so your stitches are safe. They're not being stretched out. They're handy things to have. Now I'm going to show you how to bind off. And because this is all knit, we're binding off using the knit stitch. So basically, to bind off, you always want to have, for this bind off anyway, you want to have 2 stitches. So you knit 2 stitches, and see again, I'm without even knowing it, I'm tensioning my yarn with my index finger just to keep it straight. What you want to do, put your needle through this first stitch, draw it. I'm tightening this second stitch very slightly so that it doesn't go off the needle. And you bring that first stitch over and off. Then you knit another stitch. You go into this front loop, pull it over the stitch and off. And you want to keep this a little bit on the loose side. If this were a neckline or a sleeve or a sock, you want it to have a little bit of stretch. The garter stitch is going to have a little bit of stretch anyway, but you don't want it super, super tight. So when you're binding off stitches, try to keep the stitch the same tension that you had when you were knitting. But if you have to err on one side or another, keep it a little bit looser. You can always tighten things up, but you can't always slacken them down, if that's a phrase. But basically, 2 stitches, take the first one over and off. So you're securing this stitch. It's not going to go anywhere because it's got this stitch in the way. It's keeping it so that it's not going anywhere. And then you do the same thing to that one. Now, I find that there are lots and lots of cast-ons. There aren't as many bind-off methods that I've seen. There are some that are very, very loose. I don't use those very often because I don't want things to be extremely loose. There are some that are decorative. You can make little picots, a little picot edge. You can bind off in pattern. Say you're working cables or lace. You can keep the pattern going and still bind off at the same time. You can decrease a little bit while you're binding off. Say you've got a really wide cable and it's very bulky. You don't want to cast that off. It will splay if you cast off stitch for stitch. So there are ways of decreasing that cable down a little bit so that when you bind off, it keeps its shape. So learning to knit, basically you cast on, you knit, and you bind off. but it's a craft that once you get involved, there are so many things to learn. There's so many methods. There's so many different ways of doing things, different types of yarns. It's a fascinating hobby, and I'm happy that I'm introducing a lot of you to it. Even if I only get 2 people watching my videos, the two people, I've opened up the world of knitting. So now we've got our knitting needles. We've got our block. See how lovely that is? It gives you this nice little edge. And we've got this little loop. Now, what we want to do, number one, we need to find our scissors. I like to work using a basket. I'll show you my basket someday. I like to keep everything in my basket, and then I've got everything handy. But yeah, just a pair of scissors. And we don't need much. If this were part of a sweater, I would take a longer tail because I want to use this tail to help sew the sweater together. But for our purposes, we really don't need much. So we're just going to cut that at the end. If you're using pure wool, you can just rip it. But this is acrylic. It's got plastic in it. So you don't want to rip it with your hands because it will always win. Now there's 2 methods to this. You can put this through and tighten it up so that there's a little bit of a knot there. I like that method. I've always kind of used that method. Another one that I will show you is when you just simply, you've got your loop and you really just pull the end through, and it's sort of self-protecting. You're gonna be doing something with this, either using it to sew a piece together, or in our purposes, we're going to weave it in. So you really don't need this secured too much, but I always feel like with sweaters, the more you can secure things, the better. So this is our swatch. You've got your long tail cast on from where you started. You've worked all the way up, just knitting every single row, and you've bound it off. So if you've done it, you know, properly, you've got two ends, 2 tails. Now, if you are working in different colors, say you wanted stripes, you'd have more tails to weave in because you'd be working with, you know, every color you're going to have a beginning tail and an ending tail. So every color you use, you've got 2 tails. You know, and I think that I'm going to show you how to weave in these tails at a later time because they're not bothering us. They can stay. They're not bothering us. So this is the end of our garter stitch.